Hi, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Art Matters series. I am Marjorie Rawle. I'm the Tirana Assistant Curator at the Fitchburg Art Museum. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Archy LaSalle. LaSalle is a Boston-based photographer, educator, and activist whose work has been shown nationally and internationally and is represented in the permanent collections of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Fitchburg Art Museum, and many, many more. He is the founder of the initiative Where Are All the Black People At? That seeks to highlight and remedy the lack of representation of Black visual artists in museum permanent collections. Archie, thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And I'm really honored to be here, not only to represent Where Are All the Black People At, but also to represent all artists around the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I want to start with talking about Where Are All the Black People At? How did this project begin? What was your inspiration for this project? Was there a particular event or something that really pushed you to get it started?
Oh, so there's a couple of parts to this. Like, I think originally it started when I was in art school at Mass College of Art back in 1978 in the photography department. And my goal was to make fine art photographs. And it was important to be in museum collections for me. And when I studied the work of people like Gordon Parks, look at Cartier-Bresson, looking at Nugene Adjei, Harry Callahan, Roy D. Coralva, Carrie Weems, and people like that. It was important for me to really make my own photographs and all. So that was my goal, not to do commercial work, but to do fine art. But then it sort of became the realization of not being accepted in galleries or not being accepted in museums, collections and things like that. So it really started from there when I started in art school, and then it sort of built up from there. But the initial, as far as Where Are All the Black People At, sort of came when I went to an exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts, and it was called A Family Show. And I noticed in that particular exhibition, a really beautiful exhibition, lots of local photographers, national photographers. But what was missing was there was not one Black or brown Boston photographer in that exhibition. And that was, it was so insulting. I mean, we have families, you know, and I took my students at the time to that exhibition, and I asked them the question, what do you notice? Do you know any of these names? And some of the students sort of picked up on it. And so I called the museum, left messages. No one called me back. And I'm in that collection. So it started from there. I said, something has to be done about that. And so what I did was went out and not only made all of those stickers that you see, and I put up all around the city, and I had my students put them up around the city, and people would rip them down and not knowing the context. But it was mainly to get people's attention, to say, like, where are all the Black people at? And in Boston, when you realize that we have so many photographers, so many artists that are Black and brown, and not in permanent collections is an insult to us. And so we wanted to do something about it. And so I went out with my students doing a little, I guess you would call it activism. We put up stickers all around the city, at the Fogg Museum, up and down Newberry Street. I went, as you can see in some of the images and all, just to get people's attention. It's funny how people would react. Some people are insulted. Some people thought I was making fun of Black people Other people will just take pictures of what I was doing, take pictures of me and things like that and send them to me. So that's how it really got started. Then I thought about having an exhibition of that particular work. And then I says, an exhibition goes up and then it comes down. And so then I wanted something that was more inclusive, monumental, to really make a statement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I put together a team of business people, educators, artists. And so we all got together and formed our group, the grassroots group, where are all the Black people at. And then we start contacting a lot of museums. I started doing research about 3 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
calling all of the museums in and around Boston, also in Houston, out in Chicago. Some responded, some didn't, but you have to keep at it. You can't get discouraged.
Right.
And what we really try to do is have a conversation with the museums, you know, and from that, you build trust. And it's not to point fingers to say, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, but where do we go from here? And that was my main goal, was just trying to have this conversation and work with curators and directors. And before I go too far, what really sort of got me was a friend of mine who was a part of the team, is Lou Jones. And so he brought it to my attention that in Massachusetts, which was founded in, where is it? 1788, February 6th. Photography was invented in 1826.
Mm-hmm.
The Museum of Fine Arts came about in 1870. And during that time, since the invention of photography in the state of Massachusetts, they have never had a solo exhibition. There's not one art museum, major gallery, or art institution has never given a Black, a brown, Boston-based artist an exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
Which is absurd.
It's absurd.
And 150 years for the MFA,
Mm-hmm.
and for all of the galleries up and down Newberry Street.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's that has to change.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can get angry, but you know, for me anyway, if I go in there angry, yelling and screaming, people will pull out that magic card, another angry Black man, you know, and you're dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we definitely don't want that. We want to be at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how all of this sort of, I would say, came about.
Yeah. And I really like this distinction that you make of the difference between having a solo exhibition or a special exhibition, kind of one-offs, as some people would call them, and the difference between that and actually committing to accessioning works by Black artists in major museum collections. And what do you think, what is that distinction about? Like, why is it so important that museums buy and take in work by Black artists and expand their very white male ad collections?
I think, well, the museum is incomplete if it doesn't have us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's you can't call yourself whole. And it's important to have your work in major museums because you're recognized by that. You're part of the community. You're also, with the inclusion of Black artists' work, it makes you legitimate. You can maybe get shows or exhibitions in other galleries or other museums. And so without that, let me back up a bit, because when I was in art school, you had all of the major galleries would come around to their Mass Colors of Art. Every year you would see them sort of get different artists in their stable, let's say. And they had, right out of art school, they had a gallery connection. That wasn't the case for Black and brown artists and artists of color. I mean, we didn't have that. And to me, this says this was done intentionally. You cannot have every major museum and gallery across the state and across the country for that fact, not have Black and brown artists in your museum if it wasn't something that was really planned out. For me, it's really important to have that connection, because without that connection and just having a one show or one exhibition, what it is, as some of our members say, you're good enough to be on our walls, but you're not good enough to be in our collections. Mm-hmm. And so that gets me back to the Black History Month sort of phenomenon, as I would say. I don't participate in Black History Month. And I said to some of my friends, I said, I wouldn't exhibit my work at the Museum of Modern Art in a Black History Month show. I wouldn't have a solo show. Not that they're going to come knocking on my door to give me an exhibition, but I wouldn't, because it's an insult. It's saying that in many cases that all Black artists do the same work. Mm-hmm. My work is not about my culture per se. Mm-hmm. My work is about my vision, how I see the world. And there's a lot of artists like me that don't get necessarily recognized, because most people think that all Black and brown artists should photograph their culture, let's say, things like that. And I don't. And I get a lot of pushback from a lot of my Black and brown friends saying, like, why don't you be in the show? That was an exhibition once up at the Addison Gallery. Mm-hmm. And this is the first sort of run-in with museums and galleries around Black History Month. And someone says, oh, they're having an exhibition, send in some of your work, because I had been working on the Orange Line, that's the subway system here in Boston, for about, 3 or 4 years. And so the work that I sent in was from a lot of the parties that I'd gone to, like a lot of the drag queens, may have been the gay community as a whole. That kind of work, I sent that to the Addison Gallery, and they sent it back immediately saying, oh, no, we don't want that. We want work from Roxbury. We want the work that you did on the Orange Line with the Black people sitting out on the stoops next to the trash cans and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm Black, so this is my work. And so obviously I didn't get in that exhibition. Then I found out it was a Black History Month show. And I said, I wouldn't want to be a part of that anyway, because we don't all do the same work, and we're all different. We want to be looked at as individuals, Mm-hmm. So that's why I think it's really important to be in the permanent collection. Mm-hmm. When I call and ask, and when I was doing the research, and I would ask, how many Black artists do you have in your permanent collections? I got this so-called hamana, as George Crandon used to say on the Honeymooners. We'll have to get back to you. Some say none. Take the Boston Artists Guild, one of the places that I contact, the museum, the MIT Museum, and it's like, this is appalling, especially in the digital age. Mm-hmm. To have no one?
Yeah.
It's absurd. And so I have to inspire all of my students. It's like, this is what you're up against. So that's why I think it's important, because when young people go to museums, they want to see people that look like them on the wall. They want to see people that look like them in the permanent collection. Mm-hmm. And so my students, at first, because I didn't talk about my own work, and somehow they went online, some of them saw that I had pieces in the Museum of Fine Arts, and I used to joke with them that I was 95 years old. This was back when I would say this was back in 95, 98, 93. But to a teenager, if you're over 30, it's the same.
Old.
So that was this is sort of funny. But then they would go to the museum, and the Museum of Fine Arts in this case, and they were asked to see my work, and they was like shocked. They was like, if you have work there, it's like, why are you teaching here? I said, they don't buy 10 pieces every day, things like that. And I said, don't you want someone teaching you that's really passionate about it? And so my thing was really encouraging my students and letting them know the odds that they're up against. I mean, even white artists is up against some major
Yeah.
odds, you know, so it's not just the Black artists. And I guess that's a pretty long and broad answer to your question.
Oh, it's great. It's a complicated question.
It is.
um,
It is.
yeah, and I think it's interesting too because you mentioned this. You know, it is museums have been, especially in their collecting practices, purposefully, as you point out, it has to be purposefully and systematically exclusionary. You know, they're telling a particular story, and so some might say just get rid of them. We don't need these kind of gatekeeper institutions. But I think you bring up a good point that museums can still be important in 2020 and do good, important work, and take steps to correct their practices in the future. And I just wonder what you think about, some big museums are doing this work, like I think the Baltimore Museum recently has decided to sell works by Andy Warhol, Mark Rothko, big white male artists in their collection, and then take the money to fund purchasing artists of color and Black artists. And so I wonder what you think about, strategies like that, and how you think museums are going to get to this kind of ideal future where they're more inclusive and more representative of what the world actually looks like now.
Well, you brought that up, and I was thinking while you were speaking about Warhol and all, and the museums are sort of like the stock market, the traders, they're trading works back and forth, and, it goes up, it goes down. Some people doesn't like this, some people don't like that. As Malcolm X said, part of that quote was any means necessary. It's like, you got to do something. I mean, this systemic racism has been here for 401 years. And it's funny, there was Jim Clyburn I was listening to him the other day, and he said the exact same thing. It's like, this just didn't start during the 60s. And a lot of people say that, oh yes, it was during the 60s when the civil rights movement. For me, the civil rights movement started in 1619. Okay? And we've been dealing with that ever since. And so let's call it what it is. I'm here because, well, part of me, going by my DNA, is here unwillingly. And there's part of me that brought me here. And so we have to think about, what are we going to do today moving forward, and acknowledge what happened in the past. And I think, this systemic racism affects primarily Black people, but it's not our problem. It's a white problem. It's something that white people have to deal with and own up to. Like, you're benefiting from this. And there's the ones who are really, I think, who are benefiting, but know that it's wrong, but won't open their mouth to do anything about it. I mean, and I say that even about some of the curators in museums that are Black or brown or people of color. If you're sitting there going along with something, and I know you got to pay your rent, I know you got to pay the car payment, I know you got to pay off your student loans or whatever, but you're living in a time where it's time to make a change. You have to stand up and speak up. And so even at the school I was teaching, the principal was like, well, where are all the Black people? I have my shirt on. Some people can't even wear a shirt that says it. And in back it says, we're in plain sight. You see us. And some people would say, oh, I'm colorblind. You're not colorblind. You're Black blind. You're Black blind. That's exactly what I find in a lot of museums, galleries, and so it has to stop. And moving forward, we're all in this thing, as they say, together, and we're all going to have to speak out together. So I like what's happening in Baltimore, but I think there's enough money out there in Massachusetts, especially, You could have a large donor just saying, we're going to collect Black and brown work, period, the end, and put it in the permanent collection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they can do that. If Graham Gunn could build an entire wing, and there's a wing of the Americas, you know that there's money there. And
Mm-hmm.
so invest in the Black and brown artists. And there's so many Black and brown artists of the past. I think I sent some out to the Fitchburg Art Museum, about 30 artists that has never been truly recognized for their work. And I must say, since we're on this particular topic, that I find that there's a couple of museums that are really getting it together, has it together. And Fitchburg Art Museum is one of them. I salute you. It is,
Thank you, Archie.
You guys, and Nick is just doing a fantastic job. I mean, you're doing it the right way.
That's essentially, you know, what we're trying to do up here is that kind of vision where the exhibitions, the programs, the collection, all across the board is inclusive and representative of our neighborhood, of the region, like you said. You know, that's what we're working towards for sure. And I'm curious about, you know, how these conversations, I know you've had conversations with us and other museums you mentioned, even not in Boston, you know, Houston, Chicago. How do these conversations usually go with museums and trying to ask them about their collection, their collecting practices? Do you work with them long term? Do you give them ideas? Do you come back and check on them to see their progress? You know, like what is where all the Black people at look like sort of in practice?
Okay, so one of the things when we contact a museum, they're a little nervous about
Good.
It's like when I say, hi, my name is Archy LaSalle. I'm the founder of Where Are All the Black People At? We would like to know about your permanent collection of Black and brown artists, you know. Or sometimes we send letters, and you always get this, it's a pause, it's a slight hesitation, like, is this a joke? Is this a prank? What is this? And so usually it starts out a little nervous for us and them. But then once we get to talking and their goals and expectation, and the thing of it is, regardless, the bottom line is you have to be kind, be respectful. I mean, and I say that even to all of my students, there's a big sign over the door. Be kind, no exceptions, okay? Even when you're arguing and whatever, have disagreements. But let me back up for a second. When Mr. Floyd's life was taken, museums around the country sent out these letters like that about their not being inclusive, all of that stuff. And I won't say that they weren't sincere, but it was painful to watch the way he lost his life and then to see the letters come forth. And as I often say, it seems like they all went to the same letter writing class because all the letters were the exact same. Yeah. And the one that really caught my eye the most was the one from the Whitney when they said, oh, we're trying to figure this out just like all of you. And as I said, you're not writing to Black people and brown people. We figured it out long ago. We figured it out back in 1619. You don't want us here, you just want to use us here. And so that was really offensive to see these letters come out. Now, all the letters are out. And I say, how many of these museums has collected Black and brown artists at the rate that they put out those letters? Very few, hardly any. Yep. And that to me was really disrespectful. But our approach to the museums and collectors and all, it's really nice. I have to say, we have really good working relationships with several. There's the George Eastman House who really turned it around, turning it around. There's you guys, of course, at the Fitchburg Art Museum. And there is the Rose Art Museum, which is doing a good job, I think. I know they are. I won't go into any of the details of the conversations that we have,
Right.
but we do work with them, like your museum. It's an ongoing partnership and relationship and bringing about changes. So it's an ongoing, even with the PBD Essex Museum, it's just a wonderful relationship that we have going. And especially when you follow up, we set certain goals. There's Fruitland, which Nick introduced us to. And so so when you have the introduction from one museum to the next museum, the Cordova, where Nick came from, well, he came from a lot of places, I'm sure, but it's like we want to be a part of those solutions. But the larger museums, it's a little bit more difficult. They don't, they like to work from the inside, even though we have been working with some of the larger museums, like down in Houston, the Houston Museum of Art, and, the Boston Museum of Art, and also down in Richmond, we're in contact with them as well. So, and it's a lot of work. I mean, we're a really small organization, and some of our members work more diligently than others, but we also have other jobs, from the attorneys and things like that, and other people. So we do what we can, and we generally try to have at least 3 to 4 members present at all time on these conversations with museums. So we're really looking to have an ongoing relationship with them, and giving them certain ideas, like where to advertise would be one, certain artists to look for would be another, and ways to how the museums, they set in these communities, but most of them is not a part of the community. And so we want to talk about ideas and ways of bringing the community to them, and they go out into the community as well. So it's, every institution have its own set of goals and things like that. But I think the bottom line is we have to really, really trust one another. There's no like sneakiness going on, and like we're all in this, and we want our museums to reflect the society that it should be serving, the same as our government. We want that, and so by being inclusive and opening up the museums, and not just have it when it comes to Black and brown people, just have a celebration for 28 days or 29 days and then move on, because it's not like that. And many of us, we want to see changes. Some people want changes faster than others, but I think the conversation in itself is change. Because before we weren't having these conversations at all. And so
yeah, that kind of brings up my next question, is I was going to ask if the project, since you've gotten the ball rolling for so long now, has the project or sort of conversations around the project changed at all, like very recently, now that we're dealing with this global health crisis, increased, tumultuous political climate, and this sort of renewed reckoning with racial injustice and violence in this country? Has your work increased? Is there a new sense of urgency? Are there different things that have been brought up? I'm just curious if things have changed in the recent months.
Well, one of the positive changes is been all of the meetings through Zoom and Skype and all that. So you can meet with, you don't have to deal with this over the phone. What this person look like? What kind of facial expressions are they giving? Making fun of us, this and that. So we're able to do that. And I think by seeing people sort of electronically, it takes out a lot of the anxiety and things like that. It has given us a wonderful opportunity, where all the Black people at, to reach out to these museums and to be a part of different museum boards or be trustees and things like that, because I think a lot of the problem stems from that. If you don't have a diverse board of directors or trustees, you have to change the formula. If you don't change the formula, that you're using to collect art, you're going to be collecting the same art. And those people of color that are in these particular institutions, they got to step up. They got to have their voices. Or I had someone say the other day, like, how do you talk to Black people? It's like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, how do you talk it should be the word or the question, you know, and it is so just by that question alone just shows that in that person's mind, there's a big, wide canyon. And when you hear people say things like, go back to where you've come from and things like that, and it's like, I'm from Earth, I'm where I'm supposed to be. You know? So you have to, which brings me to when I started signing a lot of the letters when I was first sending them out and stuff, and even at school, I would sign it Archy LaSalle, artist and citizen of the universe. You know?
Yeah, that's it.
We may be a small little speck, so small you can't even see it with a microscope, but we are a part of the universe. And so we are where we belong. And so getting people to take that on and mentally, you know, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. It's what you do where you are at that particular time. It's what really makes a difference, you know.
Absolutely. And one of the last things I wanted to talk about was your work and your practice. And if, you know, if there's a good transition, like if you see your work sort of, has it changed since you started this project, or do you see this project informed by your work? I just want to give you a chance to talk about your amazing photographs.
My work has even, I'm sort of not want to sound too schizophrenic, but it's a separate thing totally. And it's, I love just going out and photographing. And some people ask, why do I use the cameras that I use? They call them panoramic cameras. I don't, I mean, a painter doesn't have a panoramic brush. They just paint.
Right.
You know? So I use my camera. And the reason I really love the White Lux and the Hasselblad X-Pan, it has more real estate. I'm responsible for more real estate. So I love that challenge. You're responsible for more space, and you have to use that space in an aesthetic and artistic way. And so whether the images are vertical or horizontal, it's the edges. I always say, I always will say, it's the edges that makes the photograph. What's in the center, off center, that's going to always be there. So when I go out and I'm looking for images, I look at the edges. I see what I want to photograph, then I start working the edges. And I never crop any of my images. They're full frame. And what I use is a rangefinder. I'm not seeing exactly what the camera lens is seeing. So you got to get really good at that and figuring out the physics of it as well as mathematical parts of it. And so I love photographing ruins, landscapes, architecture. I like the quietness. I like the elegance of the work. I like early mornings, late afternoons, or evenings. And I don't usually have a lot of people in my photographs. I think there's a portfolio on my website that has quite a few people. It's from South Africa. So for me, I mean, I traveled the world for the past, I don't know, 30 some years, 35 years. As I said earlier when we was talking about, I'm always happy to come home. Last summer, you know, obviously, I stayed here, but just from Vancouver to Israel, Italy, like dozens of times, France, places like that, driving cross country, the Baltics. But the work is pretty much the same. I mean, the country may change, but the work is really the same. I have the same approach to it. I have the same attitude about it, what I'm looking for. And so you'll see a line or a thread, no matter where the work is, whether it's interior or exteriors. I really like playing those kind of games on my fine art black and white work. So uh, when I was at Master College of Art, I had wonderful professors. I was the same age as my professors because I was 30 years old when I started. And my goal was to go out and make photographs of the people that I admired, like photographically. I mean, I'm not talking, I don't know much about their personal lives, but people like Eugene Ajay was probably my favorite, Walker Evans, Harry Callahan, and Bernice Abbott. So what I wanted to do was make a photograph better than theirs. That's a goal. And so it's always a challenge. So to make a photograph better than theirs is like, you have to up the ante, you know, you got a goal, you have a challenge. Now, you know, and I always have like music in my mind when I'm out photographing. And I guess some authors, I think a lot of Bill Evans' work. I love Bill Evans' piano. I love Stan Getz, sax. I love Toni Morrison. I mean, my goal is to make a photograph as wonderful as a Toni Morrison sentence. Paragraph would be nice, but but I'll take a sentence.
Okay.
Because the way, when I look at the way Toni Morrison constructs a sentence, how she could weave it, how she weaves it in and out. I want that in my work. I want people to be able to move around in the work and to go in, to go out, not have it be stagnant. So between the music and the literary part, like the photograph that you have at Fitchburg, of the Christian Science Complex. And if you look, the way the image goes, it goes like that, but then it comes to you also, that sweeping curve. But then on the right side, it goes out towards a building, and the left, those sort of gumdrop trees sort of expand out like that. So you got a lot of movement, even though it's sort of still, and the work is in the classical tradition. So it's not a hot commodity of all of the angst that's out in the street today, the violence and things like that. For those people that want to do that, that's fine. But as an artist, you know, this is who I've always been. Even when I was a kid at 9 years old, there was a 4th of July party that my dad gave me a camera, and he said, go out and take pictures of the 4th of July. I don't celebrate the 4th of July because that's another story. But and so I went out to photograph, and when I got the photographs back, you had to send them to the drugstore back in the 50s. And there was photographs of the corner of a house, tree trunk, big white wall tires or grills of cars, and not one person eating a hot dog, which I've never eaten, a hamburger, which I've never eaten, no grill or anything like that. And so my father went nuts. He was like, I thought I told you to photograph the party.
You missed the whole thing.
And so back then I was photographing what I wanted to photograph. And so I'm still doing the same thing now.
Yeah, I think it's you know, it's palpable. When you mention the musicians, and especially Toni Morrison, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of these kind of artists is they just have such a distinctive presence and a vision. And I think that's really interesting. And you can feel that in your work. It's very, you know, you look at it, and like you said, it's, you know, the corner of a house or the Christian Science complex, but it's got this presence that you have been able to sort of imbue in it. And that is the result of having this like very distinctive vision. And, Toni Morrison, she could be writing about the grass and it's like this artistic manifesto, and that's just because of who she was, as an artist. And so I think that really resonated with me when you started mentioning these other mediums and other artists, that I can feel that in your work as well.
Bill Evans has a song that he composed called Peace, Peace. I don't know if you know it, but if you can, listen to it at some point. Peace, Peace, Bill Evans. Wonderful. I mean, what his left hand is doing and what his right hand is doing. It's like the guy has 4 or 5 hands, and it's wonderful. And that's what I love about when I pack my army up to go out and photograph. I put Bill in my back, Toni. Those two are the ones. And there's a little James Baldwin in there also.
Right.
But I definitely have Bill and Toni with me all the time. And I can remember the day that I took the photograph of the Christian Science Complex. It was May 5th, 1988, 5:45 in the morning, because it was still nice and quiet in the room. And when I saw it, when you really see something, and it is just so exciting. And then I want to get in position right away, to whether it's handheld or on a tripod, and it's so quiet. I look around. I don't want anybody to come into the frame unless I want them in the frame. Usually I don't want any people in the frame, but and to get those edges, I live for the edges of those photographs, and I really enjoy making photographs and printing them full frame, no cropping. That's it. And I teach that way. I teach my students that way. I says, when we come in and have a critique, you can't crop any photographs. None. I want to see that black line, because to me, it's how you see the world determines what you see in the world. So I want you to, everything that's in that frame, I want you to say, I want it in there. If not, if you have to crop it, no, that's not the picture I want. Now, that's how I work. Other people work a different way. I'm more of a purist. No, I am a purist when it comes to a classical purist. That's such a thing. But that's the way I work. Now, when it comes to where all the Black people at, I mean, I'm taking those stickers and putting them all over the city.
Different tactic.
Right, but I know I've never put them on people's cars. I tell my students, don't put them on people's cars. Don't put them on the inside of museums unless it's a board that's designated for that. So when we would go out sometimes, and the kids would say, what if we get arrested? I says, that's a good thing. You want to get arrested, we get more airplay. And it says, well, what will the principal do to you? I says, I'm 95 years old. What is the principal going to do to me? Please. So I said, you have to find joy in your life. You have to do something that, I says, every day is theater. You're on stage every day. Some days you got a good role, some days not so good. But it's important to live in the moment and to enjoy the moment and love the moment, those kind of things. That's sort of, I hope you enjoyed looking at some of the images from.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that our audience will enjoy it. We're going to pack this interview with all of your images, Archie. And I want to thank you one last time for joining us today. I think this conversation has been really illuminating and critical. And I think it's really shown, what this whole series is about, is why art matters, why Black art matters, why Black art should be in museums, and Black voices to be heard and amplified. And so I want to thank you again for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Marjorie.
Of course.
I enjoyed it. Be well.
You too.
Yes.